Hi guys, Karalynn, and welcome to the Quick Hitting Screws podcast. And I'm very excited today. We are live at World of Concrete with some really exciting guests that we'll record here from the show. Today we kick it off with our first guest, Alan Sparkman, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Concrete Association. Hey Alan, how are you?
Good.
Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. You're welcome. Happy to be here. I come to World of Concrete pretty much every year, so this is new. I've never done a podcast from World of Concrete.
I know this is an exciting idea. Hopefully it'll turn out well. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became the Executive Director.
Sure. I grew up in the concrete business. My family was in the ready-mix business, so I was born into it. I did that for kind of the early part of my life, and then my dad and I sold our business, and I ended up at the Tennessee Concrete Association. So I'm starting my 26th year with TCA, and I still love what I do. I get to help people. I get to educate about concrete, and to me that's important.
I agree. So kind of what is the mission of the association?
We're a trade association, so technically, legally we're a 501c6.
Okay.
So our members are companies. We don't have individual members. And so what we do on behalf of our members, we do some of the standard stuff. We help with regulatory issues. I do a lot of work with our DOT in Tennessee around concrete specifications, that kind of thing. We communicate with designers, architects, engineers, and then we do a lot of certification and training. That's really kind of our focus. So we run certifications for the American Concrete Institute, and any contractor that touches concrete, deals with concrete, there's probably at least a couple of certifications that they should have if they want to level up. So we provide that service all across Tennessee. And then we do a lot of just communication about concrete, trying to teach people how to make better concrete, how to place better concrete, so that they get better results.
Awesome. So you're also a professor too.
I have been. So I taught for off and on at Middle Tennessee State University, which was the home of the concrete industry management program. So here at World of Concrete, there's now 5 universities across the U.S. that have a CIM program is the shorthand that we use. There's one in Texas. Middle Tennessee State in Murfreesboro was the original, and I was privileged to be around when that was getting off the ground. It was a crazy idea, but it's turned out to be a really smart idea. The retention rate across all 5 universities, people that graduate from those programs, the retention rate is almost 90%. 5 years later, which is crazy impressive, they're still in the concrete industry. So it's one answer to some of this workforce issues that everybody has. We're training people. They're primarily management. They go into a wide range of management, sales, technical, construction. A lot of them go to work in the construction side. But great opportunities, and they obviously like what they find in our industry because they stick around.
Awesome. So they're going out in the world and working in the industry once they graduate.
Yeah, I can't speak to the other colleges, but for MTSU, which is the largest program and the oldest program, the original, students typically have 4 to 5, sometimes as many as 10 offers.
Really?
So they have a lot of choice, and the money is good for them. I mean, they're in demand, and people keep coming back. So that tells you that they're producing a pretty good product, and they're filling a real need in the industry. So it's really cool for the concrete side of the industry to have that college professional track available. And again, there's a program in New Jersey, of course, Tennessee, Texas, California, and the newest one's in South Dakota.
Wow.
So really it's spread across the country.
That's pretty
really
amazing.
Cool.
And so you taught a class on sustainability, right?
Yeah, I taught some undergraduate classes there off and on. That's been a few years back now. And then they developed a master's program, which we call the Concrete MBA. It's a true MBA. The degree is issued by MTSU's College of Business, which is well respected. But the focus, all the case studies, the information is on concrete. So I developed a course, one of the elective courses on concrete sustainability, which is a huge issue for all of construction today. So that was fun to get to develop that and to kind of bring some knowledge to people that have been identified by their companies as being worth investing in. And there's a lot we need to understand about sustainability. So
Tell me more about the sustainability issue.
well, construction today, we think about construction as, moving some dirt, probably pouring some concrete, building something, and that's still kind of what construction is. But increasingly, and especially for larger projects, owners and designers are very concerned about the environmental impacts of the actual construction process. So the shorthand for all that is the embodied carbon in the construction materials. So a lot of folks who are out there building stuff every day, they don't care about embodied carbon. They're building something, which is important. But owners, the federal government, architects, most of the global design firms and construction firms, so the big guys like Skanska and Turner, those folks, they have corporate objectives that says that the projects they build within the next decade or so will be carbon neutral. So we don't have time to go into all that, but it's a big deal. And a lot of kind of the smaller contractors don't understand. They just aren't paying attention. And if they do work at a commercial level, or if they're doing work that is touched by the federal government, then they're going to have to understand that. So,
and so how does that affect the everyday, like, commercial concrete contractor? What are they going to have to do to help be carbon neutral?
A lot of it's about the selection of materials.
Okay.
So every building material, including concrete, has a carbon impact. We call it embodied carbon. There's different ways you can measure that. The most common way is something called an environmental product declaration, or EPD. So a lot of projects have requirements for products to have EPDs. So as a contractor, you're probably not going to have an EPD because you're not producing, you're buying products. But the materials that you're sourcing, on some projects, you're going to have a certain percentage of them that have EPDs. And I think as time goes forward, that percentage is going to go up. So manufacturers, like ready-mix producers, have to be aware of that. And then contractors are going to have to factor that into their material selection and into their bid.
Because it'll be more expensive, I'm guessing.
In some cases, it's more expensive. Not always, but...
So where is the biggest carbon footprint in concrete production? What is that?
For concrete, it's in the manufacturing process for Portland cement.
Okay.
So again, that's a really deep, complicated subject.
I know, I'm trying to do like high-level surface.
For concrete, if you take a cubic yard of concrete, which is the way we sell concrete, you can calculate the embodied carbon from all the constituents, the stone, the sand, the water, the admixtures, the cement, the other materials we put in there. But for the typical mix, 85 to 90% of the embodied carbon come from the cement. So that's the lever.
Gotcha. So that has the biggest carbon footprint in the cement.
By far.
They're going to have to figure out how to limit that.
Yeah, so the embodied carbon strategy is to lower the amount of cement. There's lots of ways to do that, but for contractors, that has implications.
Yeah, like does it affect the strength?
Could affect the strength. It depends, again, could be dependent on when you measure the strength, but the more you lower cement, the slower strength development occurs.
Gotcha.
So for contractors, that's a schedule issue.
Yeah.
So there are answers. There's lots of people at this show who claim to have answers, and some of them have answers.
So a lot of things are changing in the
Yeah.
industry. So you also you have your own podcast.
I do. Tennessee Concrete Association. We started the podcast last year, trying to bring information to our people in a different manner. You can't just communicate one way. You have to have several channels. So we're trying the podcast channel, and so far so good.
Yeah, I think it's an easy way to get information. People listen to it when they're in their car. I listen to podcasts too. That's what I enjoy.
Yeah.
So I know we touched on the carbon footprint, but what are some other issues that are affecting the concrete industry today?
Well, the big issue in 2022 was supply chain. So the early part of the pandemic, we weren't really affected very much by the supply chain. Ready-mix producers had trouble sometimes getting equipment, trucks. Of course, contractors, I'm sure, had the same issues. But the materials, the basic materials, sand and stone and cement, supplementals, were pretty available. But early in 22, particularly in the southeast, which is Tennessee is considered to be the southeast portion, a lot of my producers were put on allocation, which meant that their cement suppliers were only going to sell them this amount and no more. So if they had 2,000 cubic yards scheduled for the next week, the cement supplier said, well, sorry, I'm going to give you enough cement to produce 1,500, and that's all you can have. And that happened pretty quickly. People weren't prepared for that. Of course, that meant that the ready-mix producer had to turn around to the contractor and say, I can't get you this week. So the immediate impact was we saw delivery times go from, 3 or 4 days advanced scheduling to 3 and 4 weeks in some places. And it was a shock to everybody's system. And there was no answer.
As to why it happened.
Well, we kind of know why it happened, but there was no way to solve it quickly.
So why did it happen?
So in the southeast, there was probably 3 primary factors.
Okay.
So one was for a long time, the domestic production capacity in the United States is less than what we use.
Okay.
So these are rough numbers, but we produce about 90 million tons of cement every year. We're using 115 to 120.
So we were already behind.
Yeah, we didn't have enough domestic capacity.
Okay.
And that wasn't new, but we always were able to solve that by importing
Gotcha.
from a variety of countries. So, it could be Turkey, it could be South America, it could be in a number of places. But when we saw everything stopped with the pandemic, that stopped oceanic freight.
Uh-huh.
And then when it resumed a little bit, the freight, there was a limited capacity. There weren't enough container ships, and the capacity was really expensive. So we essentially lost that relief valve.
Okay, so we're like 30, you were already short.
Yeah, so that worked really well until the supply chain broke. And then we just couldn't fix it, and there was no other way to get cement from, let's say, Turkey. So Texas, for example, imports a lot of cement from Turkey. And Texas produces more concrete than any other state in the U.S. by a wide margin. So they were pretty dependent on Turkish cement. The Turkey cement was, the problem there was exacerbated when the war in Ukraine started, again, early 2022, because the Turkish cement industry depended on Russian coal
To get them.
and so that just disappeared. And so those plants shut down. Nobody was thinking about that in January,
Exactly.
right? And then the war started. So it just was another illustration of what we've always assumed was this robust local supply chain. It just isn't.
Gotcha.
And all those chickens kind of came home to roost early in 22. And then we were, as we say in football, we were behind the sticks. And it took us all year to try to get kind of back on track. For next year, for 23, I think we're in a little better shape. There's a little bit of new domestic cement production coming online, which doesn't happen very often. Some people say, why don't you just go build another cement mill?
You can't get the raw product.
You got to find a place. You have to have the right raw materials. You got to have well north of $1 billion, and you got to permit it, which takes 5 to 10 years, and then you got to build it. There's no quick solution.
Exactly.
So we're in a little better shape. The supply chain has gotten a little better. We're seeing more availability for foreign cement, which helps us. But it's tenuous. So if we have and the other thing that aggravated, particularly in the southeast, is that the existing cement mills, several of them had unscheduled maintenance, which meant they broke down.
Is that what that meant?
Yeah.
It seemed like it was awful suspect. Like, everybody had price increases, the cement industry didn't,
Yeah.
and then you had them all shut down at the...
Well, and that's, everybody loves a good conspiracy theory, but I really think that this was all those factors, and it was real.
Yeah.
If you go, I've been in this industry a long time. We've had cement allocations before. We haven't had one actually in quite a while. And there's always that, they're just, well, I don't know.
Exactly.
I wasn't in their boardroom, but what I can tell you is that the cement plants where I do know people, those plants broke down. They were not producing cement. And they did it in March, which is where we're heading into the construction season. So they typically try to build up some inventory during the cooler months They have scheduled maintenance every year, and their seed corn, what they did, carries them through. Well, this year didn't happen. Construction season has become in the south particularly. It's 12 months.
Exactly, all year round.
24 hours a day. So there was already all these strains. If we'd been watching, we probably could have predicted this.
Yeah, but I mean,
but nobody really did.
Everybody's just so busy trying to get through the day, right?
Yeah.
No, and I know I taught a class yesterday, and I went over, especially we had a lot of it in 22, and we might still be in it in 23, and adding that to your contracts, that the availability of concrete, if you can't get it or if you can't get the guys, you get more times to finish, because it really can end up in like delay damages. You ended up paying thousands of dollars to finish the project. So make sure when you're signing your contracts, you're not over promising a schedule you can't keep.
And that's the same thing I'm telling my ready mix members. When you sign that PO, you've got to have a clause that protects you when you can't get a necessary ingredient like cement.
Agreed.
We saw this issue similar also in 22, not so much in Tennessee, but the Mississippi River dried up. Again, I've been around for 6 decades. I've never seen that. Why does that matter to concrete production? Well, a huge amount of cement, both domestic and imported, moves by barge on the Mississippi River, and an amazing amount of aggregates, stone and sand. So when the river became a one-way street, essentially, which is what happened, the channel could only allow one barge in one direction at a time. There was a huge backlog. So in Nashville, all of our cement comes in via barge. So there again, there was cement on the river, but it wasn't at the terminal, and it couldn't get to the concrete plant. Mississippi had an aggregate shortage.
Oh my God.
A lot of their stone, they don't have a lot of limestone, so their limestone comes from southern Indiana on the Mississippi River. So not only did they have a problem with cement, they didn't have rock.
Oh gosh.
Pretty hard to make concrete.
That's a rough year, man.
It is. And for contractors, it just kind of rolls downhill. So the ready mix producer truly couldn't make concrete. They wanted to.
They wanted to give it to you,
but they couldn't.
Yeah.
You couldn't pour concrete. Your project couldn't proceed. Everybody needs to protect themselves because nobody had direct control over that.
No, absolutely.
There's no conspiracy about that. The water level of the Mississippi River, it's a real thing.
Exactly.
So
exactly. If you don't protect yourself, you're going to be in a financial position where you're hurting because of something you can't control.
It's hard for owners. I get that.
I get it too.
But the whole design, bid, build mentality, where owners transfer their risk to a contractor for a certain sum of money, we're not going to see that for a while. That's going to have to change because it's just not realistic.
No, because we'll run out of contractors. They'll go out of business.
Yeah.
They literally cannot sustain the risk. We already have a pay what it pays clause and the delay damages. It's going to go down to, so the owners pass it on to the general passes it on to the sub, who is the least capable of handling the risk.
Yeah.
And they will go out of business.
Yeah.
And then we really won't have anybody to do anything.
Yeah. And it's just another thing that, on the workforce side, which is the other challenge that's facing everybody. It's another thing that's going to have a negative impact on that. So we have to get better at protecting. It's not making excuses.
No, I agree.
And most construction guys, the good ones, don't make excuses. They get stuff done.
Exactly.
That's why I'm still in this industry. I love that kind of person. But this is not making excuses.
No.
This is things you can't control. You have to protect yourself from that, and you got to communicate that
Up the chain.
Up the chain. So that's another thing. Typically, construction guys aren't good at is communication.
Absolutely.
So you got to get better.
I agree, and just be honest. Hey, this is what it is, and be honest on the front end, right?
Yeah.
And most GCs will appreciate you just being honest. Hey, here's what I'm looking at. I can't get your contract.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna have to figure out a way around it. But punishing me because this is gonna happen is not the way to solve the issue.
That's right.
So I know we were talking earlier about you often get calls from homeowners too. And how do you work with that? How do you work with contractors to figure that out?
Well, the typical call I get from a homeowner, they've moved into a new house, or sometimes it's an older house, but they've just made the biggest financial investment of their life, and their concrete driveway is not performing as they expected. It's got cracks, maybe it's got a surface problem. So they call me as the concrete association, looking for answers. If it's a crack, my answer sometimes is not what they want to hear. That's an inherent part of concrete, and it doesn't mean your concrete is bad. So, again, the contractor probably could have done a better job communicating that on the front end. And so I go out and look at a lot of concrete. I tell people, hey, I'll come and look at it, but I'm going to tell you my opinion. I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. So just understand that if you ask me to come, I say the same thing to my members. I'm not going to go make an excuse for you. I'm going to go tell you what I think's happening.
And I know in residential construction, there's not a whole lot of standard. Is there a standard that contractors can look to when there isn't like a code standard or something?
Well, yes, there's a standard. It's usually not the building code. A lot of homeowners think the building code protects them, but in most jurisdictions, at least this is the way it is in Tennessee, there is a residential building code, but it stops at the drip line of the house. So your patio, your sidewalks, your driveway, none of that is covered or no standards in the International Residential Code, the IRC. There is a residential code for concrete that's been around a long time. It's not new. The American Concrete Institute has a code. And in fact, the major IRC code adopts ACI 332, word for word for everything inside the drip line. But the IRC that's where they draw the line. ACI 332 has requirements for exterior concrete. So contractors need to be aware of that. Ready-mix producers need to be aware of that. Your homeowners won't be. That's why they hire us. But if you find yourself in court,
that would be the standard.
Then that's probably going to be the standard because it was knowable. You can say, I didn't know it, I've never read it. Well, that's not really a defense in court. So that's the standard you're going to be held to. And most people I talk to, ready-mix producers and contractors and home builders, are shocked when they understand the standard. Because in many parts of the country, the standard says you need to be putting 4,500 PSI concrete in your driveway. Most people are not doing that, but that's the standard. So,
you know that you can do at your own peril, right?
Right, you make your own choice. But and there's some other things about workmanship that I often get into. But that issue about 332, we went and talked to a lot of our home builder associations because we wanted them to know it's not a gotcha.
No,
they think that we're trying to upsell them. But this is the standard. Again, you've got the information, you decide
what you want to do.
But a lot of them said, hey, I would much rather have really protection by ordering the right material. And so a lot of them changed. And it's a minor amount of cost. It's more expensive, but it's not, it's a minor amount of cost. And the homeowner, and this is real important, the customer gets a better product. So it's not just wasted money. Sometimes we forget that. Right?
I agree. And so I deal with concrete contractors, residential side all over the country, and pool contractors especially too, who've gotten in trouble about cracking or whatever. And the biggest thing that I find is that if we're upfront, the concrete is a natural product. It's been around for centuries, but it does crack. That's part of it. If you tell them that up front, they can either make a different choice or they know that it's coming. It's when we don't explain it, we don't have contracts that manage expectations. That's when contractors get in trouble, at least from my experience.
Well, and a lot of times what I see is that contractors don't follow the basic rules to control cracking.
Gotcha.
So we know that concrete cracks. It cracks in a reasonably predictable manner, and contractors can provide for that. So how do you do that? Well, it's joints. So there's two types of joints contractors need to be installing. One is an isolation joint. So I see this a lot in Tennessee in the garage. So the garage slab technically is covered by the building code.
Because it's in there.
So I don't get that kind of issue. But an average 2-car garage is roughly 24 by 30 or something like that. That at a minimum, that garage should have a joint in the middle and another joint. And actually, that's technically not quite enough. But most of the time I go out there, I got called because the floor cracked. The homeowner thinks their house is going to fall down, which isn't the case. There's nothing wrong with the concrete, but there's no joints. The contractor, this is a workmanship issue, did not put joints in. So contractors need to know what the standards say, because the standards are very clear. So when I write a report on that, it's no joints were installed. That's a workmanship issue. So contractors say, well, I can't get paid for joints. Well,
build it in on the front end.
Yeah, that's not an excuse.
I agree.
I mean, I understand the frustration, but that's really obvious. And then the isolation joint, that concrete slab in the garage should have been separated or isolated from the foundation wall. And I rarely see that. Now, again, that doesn't mean the house is going to fall down.
There'd be more cracks.
But, when a professional comes out and writes a report, that's going to be on the contract. So they can protect themselves by doing it
The
right.
right way, exactly. And like you said, there's training, like you have training that teaches all this.
If they don't know how to do it right, call someone like me. There are resources, and this isn't rocket science. It's not new. Nobody made it up last night in the dark.
I mean, concrete's been around for,
Long time, and so have these standards. So that's important. And we see so many people doing the work. When I talk to home builders, I chuckled and say, "Do you know what what kind of concrete you're pouring in your driveway?" So, well, no, I've got a guy.
Exactly.
Well, who's your guy? Well, I can't remember his number. He's my guy. Well, the guy is the one that needs the training.
Exactly. Absolutely. And his guys need the training as well. And it's worth the investment. Trust me, as a lawyer, seeing on the back end, all of that stuff you can do in the front end and not have to deal with it, it's well money spent. You don't want to be paid me.
And kind of the final thing about cracks, what you touched on, and which is so important for contractors, you need to communicate to owners that, concrete cracks, we're going to control that with joints, which if you joint correctly, ACI says you should expect about a 97% success rate. But you can do everything right, still have a crack.
Exactly.
But that crack almost never means the concrete is defective. So that's important, and contractors need to communicate that on the front end.
Absolutely.
Here's my joint plan. So tip for homeowners, if you're a contractor, you say, "Where's your joint plan?" They get a blank look. Maybe you need to keep looking.
Exactly. Exactly. Awesome. Well, it's been awesome having you on the show and being here at World Concrete. I'm sure we'll have you on again. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey guys, this is Karalynn. Thank you for listening to an episode of the Quit Getting Screwed podcast from the World of Concrete. Hey guys, if you need help, liens, collections, contracts, we do it all. We do it in all 50 states for a flat fee and a predictable time frame. If you want to know more, reach out to us on our website, thekaralynslawfirm.com, which is in the show notes. Thanks.